BTFP by the fucking print. It it kind of felt like something big was coming, and then it didn't. It kind of felt like we were on the verge of a lot of banks collapsing, and they kind of didn't. Are we through that, or do you still think there's like risk there?
So they made it. They had a clever solution that solved one part of the risk. Any bank that held U.S. Treasuries and more MBS securities, mortgage-backed securities, cool. But there's a whole lot of other banks, the ones that actually power the American economy, that don't have that on their balance sheet. Like, as I've written about, the large banks are the ones who own a lot of treasuries and mortgage-backed securities. It's the smaller banks that actually power, the heart and soul of the American economy. They've got, office buildings, restaurants, personal loans, car loans, all these things that, the Fed doesn't want on their balance sheet. Fed's like, well, I know they run a $1 trillion like unrealized loss in their books, but again, they're in the business of making money too. And so like, I don't know. I don't know if I want that office building. Maybe you keep that, but I'll take these U.S. Treasuries. And so the problem is still there. Now, if interest rates were much lower and it's not like, I can just deposit some money in my brokerage account and I can get 5% in a money market fund. I can lend my money to the U.S. government and I get 5%. Or I can go lend my money to the bank and I get, 50 basis points, 0.5%. So like as people start to realize this and they pull out their phone and they go, oh, I can 10x my interest income? I just got to click 5 times? Why would you stay in a bank? And so the problem is still there. They haven't solved the problem. The market's kind of, saw the one issue. Oh, yeah, you put a little solution together. It's kind of inflationary. Cool. We're going to, it's summertime. Let's chill out. In the fall, once the debt ceiling is resolved, once you've had another, 6 months of how many billions of dollars are going to walk from the bank and lend their money to the U.S. government and get 10x their money in terms of interest income. It's going to be billions. And you're going to come into September, October, and all of a sudden the market's going to rediscover this problem that we already knew existed, which was, oh, fucking shit. Hundreds of billions of dollars have continued to move from all of these smaller banks into accounts at the Fed and in U.S. Treasury T-bills. And then these banks are going to start getting slaughtered again.
So cutting rates could help because it would stop people moving money out of the banks.
Right. But the problem is that there's a political issue of cutting rates because inflation is still high. So it was 4.9% in the last print, but
not in the UK, still 10%.
Yeah, exactly. So like while all the central banks want to cut, they know that they have this inflation thing, and this inflation thing is a widespread issue. Everybody gets pissed off about inflation, and they can't hide from it. It's there. And so they're like, well, what do we do? Like the banking system, we know we have this problem. They're not dumb. They see all the same, they read all the same stuff that we do. They know exactly what the problem is, but they have this political issue of, but if we cut rates and we juice markets and inflation doesn't go down, we're going to be accused of just slaughtering the common man over this cross of inflation to save the big bad banks. So it's kind of like, what do you choose? Save the banking system, fight inflation with high rates.
What would you do? What do you think they should do? What's like the right thing to do? Because a lot of people getting fucked, right? Like inflation's in the UK is really high, and look, we survive it, we're fine. But there's a lot of people I know struggling, and it feels really unethical what they're doing.
Well, I mean, this is back in Roman times and in Greece. I don't know if he was was it Solon? That Jubilee. It's a very common feature in a lot of large civilizations. You have a period of excess build up, and then there's a leader who comes in and essentially expunges debt. Right? Now, rich people hate this.
Of course.
Right? They hate it when, I lend money to all these plebs, and here's this guy, I thought he was one of us, and he's coming in here and say, well, if we want a right society and actually have, a productive, cohesive society, we need to relieve the debt burden of those who are less fortunate, and they would do a debt jubilee. Now, unfortunately, a lot of these leaders get assassinated by their peers because those in charge don't like it when the money that they've lent out does not earn an interest rate. So, a debt jubilee, student loan debt forgiveness, mortgages forgiveness, write it all off. Again, that's going to really, you're going to have to write off the debt's going to get paid anyways, right? It's a political decision. So the people in charge politically have to decide who pays the loss. There's a loss there They're not going to get away from it. Somebody's got to pay it. And so depending on the particular political structure, maybe you're going to get some strong leader who's going to come in and say, okay, we're going to disadvantage people who have a lot of money versus people who don't, and we're going to expunge debt.
Is that, I know, like, theoretically it's possible, but is it actually possible?
Of course it's possible.
They could actually implement that.
If we write laws are just things written down on a piece of paper by humans. So if we all decide today that the law is this, then the law is this. If we decide tomorrow the law is that, the law is that. Right? There's no reason why we can't do it. It's a political issue.
Where are those large pockets of debt? Where are they kind of sat? And what are they specifically writing off?
Well, there's lots of government debt. There's lots of social welfare programs that people have signed up to pay for in particular governments. And then you have the things that people own, household debt, credit card debt, auto loan debt, mortgages, those sorts of things, student loans, depending on your particular jurisdiction, right? So you have pockets of people who have a debt. You can choose to relieve that debt or not relieve that debt. It's up to you.
And what happens to the businesses that would fail in the back of that?
That's a political issue, right? It's like, okay, am I okay with this cohort of these financial system or society being worse off? Because there's no way to, unless we're going to discover some massive new form of really productive energy and deploy it immediately, there is no way of someone's paying the cost. Inflation, businesses go bust. Got to choose. There's no good answer for this. It's all bad decisions.
Yeah. Has it ever happened in modern time? Like, is there ever been a recent debt jubilee? Because the example you gave, I think, was like Roman times. Right?
Yeah.
Like, has there been any examples?
I'm sure there have. I can't really think of one off the top of my head.
But people are.
This is not something that we don't understand in the human fabric of civilization, of debt jubilee.
Yeah, but who? I've not heard anyone talk about it. I mean, you're talking about it.
Well, in the U.S., there was talk of student loan forgiveness.
I've seen that one
in the U.S. And again, so what happened? And I think the Biden administration floated this idea out there that they were going to forgive student loans, and you had certain people up in outrage, understandably so. Like, I paid all my debt. Why these guys? Why do they get their debt unpaid for? And then you had, I lent money. Why are you abrogating my contracts and taking away my income? Again, valid concern, right? And it's a political decision. Who is strong enough politically to enforce a loss on one sector of society?
I don't know if I'm getting this wrong, but in that case, is that a jubilee, or were they going to print money to pay off the debt, or is it the same thing?
Well, if you owe it to the federal government, they basically say, okay, boom, you don't have to pay it anymore. That's a debt jubilee.
That seems like an easier one for the government to write it off. Just say, forget the debt, you owe us. But if you debt jubilee against, I don't know, institutions, banks who are owed money, could those banks collapse?
For sure, absolutely.
And then just loan them money to start a new one.
Or what happens in a true bankruptcy situation? The creditors take over the bank. It's not like if the bank goes bust, like, okay, cool, depositors, you took a risk by putting your money in this bank. You're going to take a haircut, but now you own a portion of it. So what are you going to do with this bank, right? That's how things are supposed to work. There's no painless situation. It's just that today we've all decided in just about every major country in the world that we don't want to ever have anyone lose any money. And so now in any situation where there's distress, we turn to the printing press and say, oh, no, don't worry about it. We got you. You made a bet, market didn't go your way, but we're here with the government. We're here to help. We're going to print some money and make you whole. And in the beginning, that everyone feels really great. But now towards the end of, 80 years since World War II of all this accumulation of debt, it's becoming harder and harder to do that. And the consequences are becoming even more dire.
That's like that Dan Tubb conversation. We interviewed this guy and he was talking about, since World War II, Western nations essentially become insurance companies. They don't allow anything to go wrong for anyone. Everyone will fix every mistake in your life. Yeah. And he said that's what's compounded all these issues.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Is there a kind of game of chicken that goes on with this though? Because if the US was to have a big debt jubilee, I don't know what happens to ratings, but we are seeing these kind of shifts. We've had Lynn Alden on the show a few times, and she's talked to us a lot about the rise of the BRICS nations and people trying to escape from like dollar dominance. Is there a geopolitical risk to a debt jubilee?
For sure, depending on who you're impacting, right? Let's say that some politician in the U.S. said, okay, all debt owned by country X is no longer payable. We've just lowered our debt burden by Y, right? Whatever that amount is, right? You could do that. It's perfectly within their right to do. It's not to selectively choose to repay people. But then obviously, then why would anyone else hold your currency or invest in your bonds, right? So you can do anything you want, but there's a consequence to the action. Whether or not you like the consequence is the question at hand.
Yeah, that's the kind of like the geopolitical side to it that I think debt jubilee is possible, but the US wants to maintain for as long as it can this kind of
it's built a reputation of contract is a contract is a contract is a contract. Cool. All right. Well, if you pile in a bunch of debt, then there's consequences to that. Do people actually care? I don't know.
I think most people don't really know what's going on, Arthur. That's the problem. Yeah, none of my friends at home have got any idea what is going on. They've got no idea. They don't understand what causes inflation. They don't understand.
But no one understands what causes inflation.
Is that true?
I mean, obviously, it's a monetary phenomenon. There's also all sorts of different factors at play. Inflation rates are very volatile when you start going up a lot. Like, there's a cool chart that I think Luke Rahman always posts of the price of gold in the Weimar Republic, and it's like this. It's like a it's like a seesaw. Yeah, even though in the end, it got devalued massively. If you traded that, you could have gotten wrecked, even though you had the right.
You would have done. You would have got wrecked. It goes up and down like hundreds of.
Yeah, and that's the risk we're entering into. Because I think it might have been Luke or somebody else said, if you look at the charts now, most charts on modern markets, they look like early Weimar. It looks like we're about to go yo-yo. Like, they want to defeat inflation, they raise interest rates. Interest rates fuck people, so they drop them. Then we get more inflation because they print more. And so it feels like we're yo-yoing into but you think, wow, we're not gonna be like Weimar here in the West. But it feels like we could head that way.
It depends on the country, right? I think I've written previously, like, everyone's like, oh, the US is going to have hyperinflation, blah, blah, blah. I was like, I don't think so. I mean, the US has sufficient food supply, sufficient energy supply, two neighbors who supply them either with energy, Canada, or labor, Mexico, right? And so they're fine. They can be an autarky if the country wants to be. Doesn't have to be. Other countries like Europe are kind of fucked, right? They they think they're America, but then they continually find out that they're absolutely not, and have all sorts of misguided energy policies and don't have the base stuff, right? So again, depends on who you are, where you are.